Townes Van Zandt was one of those rare singer-songwriters whose music reached straight into the hidden corners of the soul. Even now, more than 2 decades after his passing, you can feel his presence through the raw honesty of his songs. He didn't chase fame so much as he uncovered personal truths, turning his own pain and poetry into a legacy that country and folk musicians still stand in awe of. He's especially recognized for Pancho and Lefty, a song that to this day is considered a gold standard in country folk storytelling. His name may not be as big as Willie Nelson's in the mainstream, but among many serious fans and fellow artists, Townes remains an almost mythic figure, someone whose words and life experiences remain deeply relevant. The story of his final years, marked by both tremendous artistic depth and devastating personal struggles, reveals why he still matters today. Townes grew up in a relatively comfortable family environment in Texas. Early on, he absorbed an eclectic mix of musical influences, blues, old-time country, folk, and developed a fascination for lyricism. While country music during the 1970s saw a rise in polished Nashville productions and radio-friendly hits, Townes was wandering a different road. He leaned into a more intimate style of storytelling that was as much about sparse melodies as it was about the haunting spaces between them. The cultural atmosphere of that era, with its flourishing singer-songwriter scene, had room for many voices, but Townes stood apart by weaving a darker, more introspective strain of country folk. He'd perform at small clubs and dives, playing for people who craved authenticity more than glitz. At a time when the golden age of country was branching off in multiple directions, some leaning more into pop elements, others into outlaw grit, Townes quietly blazed his own trail. Without the standard path of radio hits or giant festivals, he still influenced a broad swath of artists who heard in his voice a certain poetic vulnerability that was hard to ignore. During the height of his career, Townes proved himself a remarkable songwriter, with tracks that quickly became favorites for those who discovered them. Pancho and Lefty, of course, was a key moment, eventually finding mainstream success through Willie Nelson and Merle Haggard's version. Yet Townes' original performance carried a haunting, world-weary air that's never quite been matched. 2 lesser-known projects, though, capture different sides of his artistry. The first is a series of informal recordings he made in a friend's garage in the late 1960s, often called the Lost Garage Tapes by dedicated fans. It's said that on these tracks, you can hear him exploring a more blues-oriented style, almost as if he were testing out an alternate musical identity where he channeled Lightnin' Hopkins as much as Hank Williams. These tapes rarely get official mention, but for those who've heard them through underground circles, they paint a picture of an artist relentlessly searching for new ways to convey his stories. Another rarely discussed episode is his brief collaboration with a group of West Coast session players in the early 1980s, musicians who primarily worked in jazz fusion. Townes laid down a handful of demo tracks with them, layering his plain-spoken vocals over their slick instrumental flourishes. The combination was odd, perhaps too strange for major labels at the time, but it revealed Townes' willingness to experiment. He might have stuck to the lonesome guitar on stage, yet behind the scenes, he remained open to any creative spark that could ignite a new form of expression. Still, even as Townes' reputation as a songwriter grew, his personal life was veering into increasingly shaky territory. He wrestled with severe depression from an early age, and he once underwent electroconvulsive therapy that reportedly wiped out large chunks of his memory. As he got older, alcohol and drug misuse often accompanied him like unwanted companions wherever he went. Throughout much of the 1970s and 1980s, These struggles overshadowed many of his professional opportunities. Friends, family, and musical colleagues speak of a gentle soul who could be witty and warm one moment, then abruptly withdraw into a deeply private anguish. It was as though he had a well of sadness he couldn't quite close off, one that fueled the power of his songwriting, but also threatened to consume him from within. By the time the 1990s rolled around, Townes was living a life that most people would consider unconventional, if not downright difficult. He often drifted from place to place, relying on sporadic gigs, the generosity of friends, or small royalties from his work. A close friend of his, the singer-songwriter Guy Clark, once said, "Townes had a way of burning through life's illusions, but he also burned through a lot of safety nets." That's exactly how it felt. When Townes performed, you saw a man who stripped music down to its emotional core, but away from the stage, he never quite found a stable ground. Those final years, leading up to his death at the age of 52, were marked by a poignant blend of hope and despair. He'd still get booked at small venues filled with loyal fans who clung to every note. In quiet corners of bars or coffee houses, he'd deliver heartbreaking renditions of songs like "If I Needed You" or "Tecumseh Valley," bringing tears to the eyes of listeners who understood the real-life pain behind those lyrics. Yet the moment he'd leave the stage, reality would crash down. The shaky finances, the health concerns, and the internal battles he couldn't quite outrun. People who spent time with him in those days noted he seemed physically frail. His friends worried that the combination of long-term substance abuse and untreated depression would eventually catch up to him, if it hadn't already. And for many, it was heartbreaking to see how his gentle heart remained so unguarded, so vulnerable to the storms that life kept throwing at him. One particularly emotional story from his later years involves a small kitchen gathering at a friend's house just outside of Nashville. Townes, a guitar balanced on his knee, played songs until almost dawn, entertaining a handful of people who felt honored just to hear him up close. According to an eyewitness, at one point someone asked him about the constant themes of loss and sorrow in his music. Townes, they say, shrugged and said, "That's just the way the world talks to me." Then he proceeded to strum a chord progression that turned into a short, improvised lullaby. A small voice recording of that night exists, passed around by fans and never officially released, capturing the rattle in his voice, a mixture of whiskey, too many cigarettes, and an unmistakable ache. Moments like these emphasize just how deeply intertwined his music and emotional state were. You got the sense that what he sang about was never simply a performance. It was a direct channel into his spirit, battered yet strangely radiant in its candor. During this time, he also faced legal and financial troubles that exacerbated his instability. Some controversies emerged around who controlled the rights to certain songs, with allegations that he'd signed away portions of his catalog under questionable circumstances. Critics argued that he was being taken advantage of because of his fragile state, while others believed Townes himself made decisions, sometimes rash and unwise, out of immediate desperation for cash. Whatever the truth, these contract disputes and royalty issues placed an additional cloud over his later career. It was painfully evident that a man of his talent was not receiving the kind of financial security that a catalog like his might have afforded someone else with fewer demons. And fans could only watch, helpless, as the songwriter who gave the world so many profound verses struggled just to keep a roof over his head. As his health deteriorated, loved ones encouraged him to seek help. But Townes had always been wary of institutionalized approaches to mental health and addiction. From an early age, he'd experienced treatments that he felt robbed him of pieces of himself. That left him in a precarious position, vacillating between sporadic attempts at sobriety and relapses that often came without warning. Some shows would be canceled at the last minute because Townes was too ill to perform. At other times, he'd soldier on, stepping on stage with an obvious tremor in his hands but a fierce determination in his eyes. Audiences would see a man who was simultaneously proud, exhausted, haunted, and driven by a force that neither he nor they fully understood. Yet for all the darkness in his later life, Townes never entirely lost that spark of humor and kindness that old friends remember vividly. He'd crack wry jokes revealing a sharp wit, or delight in telling tall tales about his travels. Steve Earle famously described Townes as the best songwriter in the world. Half joking, he'd stand on Bob Dylan's coffee table in cowboy boots to prove it. But beneath the joke, there was a profound respect for Townes's gift. People who wrote him off as simply a sad balladeer missed the nuances of his personality, his ability to see absurdity and wonder in life even when heartbreak was his constant companion. As the mid-1990s approached, the alternative country and Americana movements picked up steam, and many younger artists cited Townes as a major influence. They found in his songs a truth and simplicity that cut through the polished veneer of contemporary country radio. Some even tried to reach out to him, hoping to collaborate or simply to learn from the man behind the haunting tunes. But Townes was increasingly difficult to track down. His last few years involved frequent moves, medical issues, and occasional stints in rehab facilities that never quite stuck. Those who managed to find him described moments of brilliant conversation followed by long silences where he seemed lost in thought or in memory. When asked if he realized the extent of his influence, he would sometimes shrug and say something along the lines of, "Well, that's nice," as though it was entirely separate from his sense of self. In that way, he remained an enigma, the revered poet who never felt entirely comfortable with reverence of any kind. His final months were marked by acute physical decline. He developed various complications linked to years of drinking, and there were times he could barely manage a guitar. But still, he tried. One friend recalls a small gig not long before he passed, where Townes needed help onto the stage. He sat on a stool, guitar propped against his frail body, and gave a performance that reportedly moved people to tears, not just for the music, but for the courage it took to show up at all. He sang Poncho and Lefty with a trembling breath that reinforced the heartbreak in those lyrics. By the time he finished, the audience was silent, too moved, it seemed, to even applaud right away. It was as if everyone in the room understood they were witnessing a form of final testament. Controversies and debates about Townes's choices continued to swirl during those last years. Some believed he romanticized the tortured artist image, perpetuating destructive myths about substance abuse and creativity. Others argued that he never glamorized his struggles. He just lived them, and he wrote about them in ways that let the rest of us see what that pain felt like. A handful of critics questioned why those around him didn't intervene more aggressively, but close friends countered that repeated efforts had been made. Townes was simply not the kind of person you could compel to change. In interviews, a few bandmates acknowledged feelings of guilt or regret, wishing they'd found a way to help him reclaim his health. Yet they also recognized that Townes had an inner compass that seemed pointed toward self-destruction, an inescapable part of his psyche that, for better or worse, was bound up in his art. When he passed away on January 1st, 1997, at the age of 52, Townes Van Zandt left behind not only a treasure trove of songs, but also countless stories of an artist who, in many ways, served as a direct channel for raw, unfiltered human emotion. His death was quiet. He wasn't a chart-topping star, and the news didn't dominate mainstream outlets. But within the songwriter community, and among a growing cult of fans, it felt seismic. People gathered at small memorials, sharing bootleg recordings and tearful memories. Even folks who had only brushed shoulders with him at a bar or a music festival would speak about the strange magic of seeing him live, how it felt like staring into a mirror that reflected the brightest and darkest parts of the soul. Why should anyone today, particularly older viewers who might recall the heyday of classic country or the rise of the singer-songwriter movement, care about Townes Van Zandt's story? Part of the reason is that he serves as a potent reminder of art's capacity to convey human frailty with stark honesty. He never had the lavish success that often accompanies legendary status, but he influenced a broad array of artists, some well-known, some still emerging, who cite him as a guiding light for how to remain genuine, even when you're singing about the hardest parts of life. In a culture that often prizes surface-level optimism and quick fixes, Townes's work stands as a different kind of beacon, one that says it's okay to dwell in sorrow, to admit brokenness, and yet still find beauty in that brokenness. For older viewers who face their own storms, health crises, loss, regrets, there's something almost achingly relatable in how Townes navigated his final years. He made mistakes, certainly, and he paid dearly for them. But he also persevered in creating music that touched people in profound ways. He reminds us that life is often more complicated than neat redemption arcs or cautionary tales. Sometimes the best we can do is keep singing our truth, even as the world grows dark. And while it's heartbreaking that he never found the personal peace so many hoped he would, he still left us with a lasting gift, songs and stories that let us sit with our sadness without shame and maybe, just maybe, find a bit of solace. In a way, Townes invites us to look inward, to face our own sorrows head-on, and perhaps to find in them a bittersweet kind of hope. That's a powerful part of his ongoing legacy, the willingness to bear witness to the darker corners of existence without losing sight of life's inherent poetry. And so, as you picture that weary man, guitar in hand, letting out a trembling melody into a smoky room, you might also feel the quiet hush of understanding. He wasn't just telling his story, he was telling ours too. And that ultimately is why his life and his final struggles still deserve our compassion, our respect, and our memories. He gave voice to the silent ache many of us carry, and in doing so showed us that the ache itself can become a kind of song, a testament to both the fragility and the resilience of the human spirit. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.